This is a patient with a Crystalens Z syndrome. She has astigmatism resulting both from uncorrected, against the rule, posterior cornea astigmatism and some lens tilt. We're going to remove the lens and replace this with a Symfony Toric lens at the 180-degree axis. Here we're making a superior scleral tunnel. This will be made in a self-sealing fashion using a frown incision. And I'm coming from the superior cornea because it gives me a better angle to cut the plates at the hinge to take apart the lens and remove it. So I'm making a paracentesis here, and we'll make a second paracentesis so I can work with both hands. And I'm going to inject dispersive viscoelastic to protect the endothelium and stabilize the anterior chamber. Now I'll enter the anterior chamber with a keratome to create a self-sealing incision, and I'm entering fairly anterior to make sure there's a Descemet's lip that seals my incision. I'm now injecting viscoelastic into the capsular bag to dilate it and free up the lens. You can see the rhexis here is a bit small, and what I want to do is prolapse the optic of the lens anterior to the capsular rhexis. So I'm using cohesive and then dispersive viscoelastic to pop the lens up in front of the anterior capsule so I can cut the hinge here. I'll now use a Symfony hook to pull this hinge toward me away from the anterior capsule so I can safely cut it with the 19 gauge scissor without damaging the anterior capsule. I'll now grab the optic with the microforceps and pull a little bit so I can expose the other hinge, which I will cut again with the same scissor, the 19 gauge scissor. And I'm being very careful not to hit the anterior capsule. I'll now put a little nick in the optic so that the lens will fit through the incision, and then I can just pull it out through the 3.5mm incision I've made superiorly. I'm now going to dissect these haptics out. Usually there's a cocoon of fibrosis around the whisker, so I'm going to grab this and sweep the fibrosis off with the Symfony hook. On the other side, the fibrosis is a bit more tenacious, and I'm having a little difficulty sweeping this ring of fibrosis off the end of the haptic, which is a little bit larger on this side, the haptic end, than on the other side, a little bit more difficult to get past. So I've made a decision to abort this and simply to cut the whisker at the midpoint. So I'll give a little tension and cut this using a haptic cutter. And now I can pull this plate out of the eye. I'm going to use a similar technique on the other side, pulling on the plate and sweeping the fibrosis off the whisker on one side and then the other side to free it up. I can now take this plate out of the eye safely. Now I can reach in and grab that little remnant of the end of the whisker, which will come out the other side without any resistance. We're now injecting a Symfony single-piece toric acrylic lens in the capsular bag. We're going to rotate the lens into the proper position to correct the patient's astigmatism. The viscoelastic is removed from in front and behind the lens, and the position of the toric lens is finalized. I've made a decision to expand the capsular rhexis a little bit, so I'm going to come from the side with a micro scissor, make a little nip in the anterior capsule with the scissor, and then I'm going to use a micro forceps through the paracentesis to complete the enlargement of the rhexis. This is to prevent edge glare from the rhexis being smaller than the scotopic pupil. The chamber is inflated to physiologic pressure and the case is completed.